The moment I walked into the hospital administrator's office and saw the old man from the cafeteria sitting in the chair across from my director's desk, wearing a pressed blazer with a hospital lanyard I had never seen, before I was convinced I had opened the wrong door, I started to back out, mumbling an apology, when my director, Mr. Okafor, looked up and said, "No, Sarah." The old man turned and looked at me. He had the same calm, unhurried eyes I remembered from 3 weeks ago, the same quiet way of holding himself, like someone who had never felt the need to take up more space than necessary. He gave me a small nod, the kind that said he recognized me too. I sat down in the only empty chair, my hands folded in my lap, trying to remember if I had done anything wrong recently. I went through my last few shifts in my head like a checklist. A missed notation in a patient file. A medication cart left unlocked for 4 minutes. Something. There had to be something. But the old man just looked at me steadily and said, "I imagine this feels a little strange." "Yes, sir," I said. "A little." He smiled. "Good. That means you're paying attention." That was when Mr. Okafor slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me, and I saw the letterhead at the top, and I understood that my life at St. Matthias Regional Health Center was about to change in a way I could not have planned for. Let me go back to the beginning. I had been a registered nurse on the cardiac step-down unit at St. Matthias for 3 years when this happened. The hospital sits just outside of Kingston, Ontario, about halfway between Toronto and Ottawa, the kind of mid-sized city where everybody eventually knows somebody who works there. I had done my placement at St. Matthias straight out of nursing school at Queen's, and when they offered me a position, I took it without hesitating. I grew up 20 minutes away, in a small town called Odessa, and the idea of staying close to home suited me just fine. My unit was on the 4th floor. We took patients who were stable enough to leave the ICU, but not quite ready to go home post-cardiac events, arrhythmia monitoring, people recovering from procedures. The work was demanding in a specific way, not the chaos of the emergency department, but a kind of sustained, concentrated attention that wore on you differently. You had to hold a lot of information about a lot of people at once. You had to notice things. I was good at it. My manager, a woman I'll call Diane, had told me as much during my last performance review. "You're the kind of nurse this floor needs more of," she said, and I had gone home feeling proud of that in a way I couldn't quite articulate to my roommate. But there was a problem on our floor, and her name was Dr. Patricia Hensley. Dr. Hensley was the chief of cardiology at St. Matthias. She had been there for almost 18 years, and in that time she had accumulated a particular kind of authority that came not just from her title but from the way she occupied space. She was tall, she was precise, and she had opinions about everything that happened on the cardiac unit, including and especially things that were not strictly her concern. She did not like nurses who asked questions during rounds. She did not like nurses who flagged concerns in front of patients. She did not like nurses who, as she once put it to me directly, overstepped the scope of their role. That last comment came after I had noticed that a patient's potassium levels were trending in a direction that worried me, and I had mentioned it during rounds before the attending physician had a chance to bring it up. I was right about the potassium. The attending thanked me. Dr. Hensley waited until rounds were over, pulled me into the hallway, and told me that if I had something to say, I should say it through the appropriate channels. "You're a good nurse, Sarah," she said, in a tone that made it sound like a limitation. "Stay in your lane." I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. I thought about it during handoffs and during charting and during the quiet parts of overnight shifts when the unit was calm and I had time to sit with my own thoughts. I had not done anything wrong. I had noticed something, and I had said something, and the patient had benefited. That was what I was supposed to do. But Dr. Hensley had a way of making you feel like the rules applied differently to you than they did to her, and after a while, that weight starts to settle somewhere in your chest and stay there. I want to be honest about something. I was not a saint during those months. There were nights when I complained to my colleagues in the break room, when I let the frustration seep into my voice more than it should have. There were shifts when I moved through the motions with a kind of dull efficiency that was technically correct but not what I was capable of. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hours, but I kept showing up. I kept doing the work. I kept being the nurse I knew how to be, because at the end of the day, the patients on my floor were not responsible for the dynamics between me and my chief of cardiology, and they deserved my full attention regardless. The morning it all began, I was coming off a 12-hour night shift. It was a Tuesday in early March, one of those Ontario mornings where the cold has started to let go just slightly, where the snow on the parking lot edges looks tired and gray and the air smells faintly like the possibility of something different. I was still in my scrubs, my coat pulled over them, walking toward the hospital's main cafeteria to grab something to eat before driving home. The cafeteria at Street Matthias is open to the public families of patients, people from the community who come in for appointments, the occasional person who just wants a hot meal somewhere warm. It's a large, bright room with tables near the windows that look out onto the parking structure, and in the morning it smells like coffee and scrambled eggs and cleaning solution in a combination that I had come to find oddly comforting. I got in line, picked up a tray, and ordered a breakfast sandwich and a coffee. The woman ahead of me in line was paying for her muffin and tea, and I was looking at the menu board above the counter even though I ordered the same thing every time, when I became aware of a small commotion happening at the register beside me. A man was standing there. He was in his late 70s, I would have guessed, with white hair cut neatly and a lined, weathered face that reminded me a little of my grandfather. He was wearing a plain wool coat, the kind with mismatched buttons that suggests it has been repaired a few times, and he had a canvas tote bag over one arm. He was holding a debit card out toward the cashier, a young woman I recognized but didn't know by name, and she was looking at the card reader with an expression of professional blankness. "It's saying declined again," she said. "I don't understand," the old man said quietly. "I just used it this morning. Do you have another card?" He patted the breast pocket of his coat, then reached into the tote bag, searching through it with the slow deliberateness of someone trying very hard not to look flustered. "I have some cash," he said after a moment. "Not quite enough, I think." On his tray was a bowl of oatmeal, a small orange juice, and a cup of coffee. The total on the screen said $9.75. The cashier waited with the particular patience of someone who has had this conversation before. A man in a business suit behind the old man exhaled very audibly. Something about that exhale bothered me more than anything else that morning. Not the declined card, not the searching through the bag. Those things can happen to anyone, for any number of reasons. A card can be compromised. A bank can flag a transaction. There is nothing shameful about a card being declined, but that exhale, from the man in the suit, had a specific quality to it, the quality of a person communicating that someone else's difficulty was an inconvenience to him personally. The old man heard it too. I could tell from the slight change in his posture, the way his shoulders moved inward just a fraction. I reached past him and set a $10 bill on the counter. "I've got it," I said. The cashier looked at me. The old man looked at me. The man in the suit looked at his phone. "You don't have to do that," the old man said. "I know," I said. "Oatmeal's good here. Take your time." The cashier processed the transaction, gave me my 25 cents change, and the moment moved on the way, moments do in busy cafeterias, quickly replaced by the next thing. I picked up my own tray, found a table by the window, and ate my breakfast while looking out at the gray parking structure and the gray sky above it, thinking about nothing in particular, trying to let my brain decompress after the shift. I didn't look for the old man. I didn't try to catch his eye or let him know where I was sitting. I wasn't looking for a thank you. I had $10, and he needed $10, and that was the entirety of the equation as far as I was concerned. I finished my sandwich, drank my coffee, put my tray away, and drove home to my apartment on Division Street, where I pulled the curtains against the morning light and slept until 2 in the afternoon. I did not think about the old man again for 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, I was midway through a day shift when Diane called me into her office and told me, with an expression I could not quite read, that Mr. Okafor wanted to see me at 4 o'clock. Mr. Okafor was the chief operating officer of Street Matthias Regional. He was not someone I had ever met in person. He was the kind of person whose name appeared on all staff emails and whose face appeared on the hospital's annual report, which I had seen once in the waiting room of my own family doctor. He operated several floors and many pay grades above me. People on my unit spoke about him the way you speak about someone you are confident you will never have a reason to speak to directly. I spent the rest of my shift trying to figure out what I had done. By 3:30 I had convinced myself it had something to do with a documentation issue from 2 weeks ago, when there had been a discrepancy between my notes and the pharmacy record on a patient's chart. It had been resolved the same day, a simple timing error, nothing that affected patient care. But I had been asked to write up a brief account of what had happened, and now I was certain that account had flagged something, and I was about to be called to account for it. I knocked on Mr. Okafor's office door at exactly 4 o'clock. "Come in," he said. I opened the door, And there was the old man from the cafeteria. He was sitting in one of the two chairs across from Mr. Okafor's desk, still in the same wool coat, though this time there was a hospital lanyard around his neck with an identification badge I couldn't read from across the room. He looked at me with the same unhurried calm he had had over the oatmeal bowl, and I had the vertiginous sensation of two separate parts of my life suddenly occupying the same room. Mr. Okafor stood and gestured to the empty chair beside the old man. "Sarah, thank you for coming. Please sit down. I'd like to introduce you to someone." He turned to the old man. "Though I understand you two have already met." "Briefly," the old man said, and there was something warm in his voice that hadn't been there in the cafeteria, or maybe it had been, and I hadn't noticed because I'd been watching the card reader. "This is Dr. James Alderton," Mr. Okafor said. "He is the incoming chair of the St. Matthias Hospital Board, and for the past month he has been conducting a quiet operational review of our facility." I looked at the old man at Dr. Alderton and I thought about the wool coat with the mismatched buttons, and the canvas tote bag, and the declined debit card, and the way he had searched through the bag with slow deliberateness. I thought about how absolutely ordinary he had looked, standing at that cafeteria register. "An operational review," I repeated. "A fairly standard process when a new board chair takes over," Dr. Alderton said. "I like to see how things actually run before I make any decisions, not how they run on paper, not during a scheduled evaluation. Just how they run." He let that settle for a moment. "The card was intentional, by the way," he said. "Not something I'm particularly proud of as a method, but it tells you things. Specifically, it tells you how people respond when someone appears to need help, and there's no obvious benefit to helping them." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Mr. Okafor slid a document across the desk toward me. It was a formal letter, on hospital letterhead, and it took me a moment to understand what I was reading. When I did understand, I read it again to make sure. It was a commendation. Formal, written, entered into my personnel file. It cited the specific incident in the cafeteria. It cited, also, 3 other incidents I had not expected to see referenced, including the morning I had flagged the potassium levels during rounds, and 2 other occasions when I had advocated for patients in ways that had apparently been noted somewhere, by someone, even when I had not been aware anyone was paying attention. "I spoke with several people on your unit this week," Dr. Alderton said. "Your manager, 2 of your colleagues, 1 of the attending physicians you work with regularly, and I reviewed your personnel file, which is quite good." He paused. "I also had a conversation with Dr. Hensley." The room went quiet in a specific way. Mr. Okafor was looking at his desk. "I understand things have been difficult on your unit," Dr. Alderton said. "I understand there have been some structural issues around how concerns are raised and received, how nurses are expected to communicate during rounds, whether their observations are treated as clinical contributions or as intrusions." He looked at me steadily. "None of that is your fault. And none of it reflects what this hospital is supposed to be." I had been holding myself very carefully since I sat down in that chair, with the specific controlled stillness that nursing teaches you the ability to remain composed in rooms where difficult things are being said, where emotions are running close to the surface, where the professional thing is to stay steady. But sitting there, listening to Dr. Alderton say those words, I felt something in my chest that had been clenched for a very long time begin to loosen. "What's going to happen?" I asked. Dr. Alderton glanced at Mr. Okafor. "There will be a formal review of practices on the cardiac unit," Mr. Okafor said. "The board has recommended it, and administration is in full agreement. Dr. Hensley has been asked to take part in a leadership conduct process. The specifics of that are confidential, as I'm sure you understand." "What I can tell you, Doctor," Alderton said, "is that the behavior you experienced, the dismissiveness, the directive to stay in your lane when you were functioning exactly as a nurse should function, that is not acceptable. And it will be addressed." He looked at me with a directness that reminded me of my grandmother, who had also been someone who said difficult things without softening them into mush. "You did something at that cafeteria that cost you $10 and meant the world to no one but me, as far as you knew. You didn't make a production of it. You didn't wait for me to notice you doing it. You just did it, and then you sat down and ate your breakfast. I have been doing this work for a long time, and I will tell you that the people who do good things quietly, without audience, are almost always the same people who do good work for the same reasons." He paused. "That is what this hospital needs more of, at every level." I thought about a dozen things to say, and I said none of them. "Thank you," I finally managed, "for what you've said, and for being honest about what's been happening. Thank you, Dr. Alderton said, for the oatmeal. The laugh that came out of me surprised all three of us. The review that followed took about 6 weeks. I was interviewed twice by the patient care quality team, and both times I tried to be accurate and fair, not to catastrophize and not to minimize. Other nurses on the unit were interviewed too, and I know from the fragments of conversation I caught in the break room that several of them said things that took some courage to say. Dr. Hensley did not disappear. She remained chief of cardiology throughout the process, as she was entitled to, but something shifted. She attended a leadership and communication seminar that the hospital brought in for senior medical staff, the kind of thing that in the past might have been presented as optional and attended by no one. She began, slowly and imperfectly, to listen during rounds in a different way. Not warmly. Not at first, that might be too much to ask of someone who has operated a certain way for 18 years, but differently, more carefully. Whether that came from genuine reflection or from the knowledge that someone was paying attention, I honestly couldn't say. Maybe it doesn't matter, as long as the patients benefit. 3 months after that meeting in Mr. Okafor's office, I was offered a position as a charge nurse on my unit. It was a role I had thought about applying for the previous year but hadn't, partly because of the climate on the floor and partly because I wasn't sure if I was ready. I said yes this time. On my first shift as charge nurse, a third-year nursing student was with us for her placement. She was bright and careful and very eager. And in the middle of rounds, she spoke up about something she had noticed in a patient's chart, a small thing, but the right kind of small thing to notice. The attending physician paused, looked at the chart, and said she was correct. She looked almost shocked that her observation had been received that way. After rounds, she found me at the nursing station and said, "Is it always like that here?" I thought about how to answer that. "It's getting better," I said. She nodded like she understood there was a whole story in those 3 words. There is a payphone well, a digital communication terminal, which is what they call them now, in the main lobby of Street Matthias, near the entrance that faces Princess Street. I walk past it every time I come in for a shift. It's not something I notice most days, but sometimes, when I'm early and the lobby is quiet, I stop for a second and think about all the versions of a day that can look completely ordinary from the outside while something important is quietly shifting underneath. I think about the old man standing at a cafeteria register with a canvas tote bag and a bowl of oatmeal and a card that wasn't going to go through. I think about how he looked, in that moment, like someone who simply needed a small kindness from a stranger who had no reason to offer one. I think about the $10, and how it was never really about the $10. I was raised in a small town by parents who both worked shifts, my mother in a textile factory outside Napanee, my father driving long haul between Kingston and Brockville. They were not people who had much extra, but they were people who stopped when someone needed stopping for. My mother used to say, "You never know what someone's carrying." She didn't mean it as a philosophical statement. She meant it as a practical guide to how to treat people when you encounter them. I've thought about that more in the past year than in the 5 years before it. The people on my unit are carrying a lot. The patients, obviously illness, fear, uncertainty about what comes next. But also, the staff, 12-hour shifts, short staffing, the emotional weight of sitting with people in some of the hardest moments of their lives, and then driving home in the dark and trying to decompress before doing it again. If you are in a position of authority over those people, you can make that weight heavier or lighter. You can treat their observations as intrusions or as contributions. You can make them feel like they need to shrink, or you can make them feel like there is room for them to grow. I was not a charge nurse when Dr. Hensley told me to stay in my lane. I didn't have the authority to change the culture on my floor by myself. But I had decided, somewhere in those tired months, that I was not going to become smaller to make someone else more comfortable. I was going to keep doing the work the way I knew it should be done, even when it wasn't recognized, even when it was actively discouraged. I'm not saying that because I want to sound heroic. I'm saying it because I think about that nursing student who looked surprised that her observation was taken seriously. I think about all the people who learn early in their careers that the right thing to do is to be quiet, to not ask, to not flag, to not speak up. I think about what that costs, not just the individuals, but the patients who depend on all of us noticing things. Dr. Alderton sent me a card after everything was finalized. It was a plain card, the kind you buy in a package of 10 at a pharmacy, with no design on the front. Inside, in handwriting that was slightly shaky and entirely legible, he wrote, "The best thing an institution can do is create conditions where good people can do good work. You helped us find where we needed to improve. Thank you. I have it on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a loon that I bought at a farmer's market in Prince Edward County 2 summers ago. I look at it sometimes when I'm getting the milk out in the morning before a shift. It reminds me that you genuinely cannot know what is happening underneath the surface of an ordinary Tuesday. You cannot know who is watching, not in the surveillance sense, but in the sense of the world registering your choices, your habits, the small decisions you make when there's no reason to make them except that it's the right thing to do. You cannot know who is sitting at the cafeteria register with a declined card, quietly noting what kind of place this is. Whether it is the kind of place where someone stops, or the kind of place where people exhale and look at their phones. Pay attention. Do the work. Be the kind of person you would want on your side of the bed if you were the one in the hospital gown. That's the most I know. That's enough to get up for.